Thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Asher. I lead emerging platforms marketing at Facebook. And today, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what we've learned over the last 15 years and the changes that have happened around us, and to offer some guidance as to how you can take advantage of all of this. Now, it may surprise you to hear me say this, given the fact that the last year has been an interesting one for Facebook.
No problem.
But we would argue that it's actually never been a better time to have a good idea. And the reason why is that in our connected
Totally
world,
my mistake. I don't know why.
the distance
I think
between...
they changed the program.
So,
We'll keep going, though. And the reason why is that the distance between a good idea and the audience that will find it has never been shorter, right? We would argue that the shortest path to market is arguably now the fastest path to growth. Now, what we've discovered is that businesses that have embraced this change and have embraced this connected world are growing at absolutely absurd and incredible rates. Let me tell you a little bit about that. When we look at the global marketplace, we see that it's evolving at extraordinarily fast paces. Now, one thing that I've noticed, and I think this is something that we can all embrace as well, is that this change that we've seen around us is happening at a pace that we had never anticipated. It used to be, for example, that if you were in the top 18 brands in this at the top of the Standard & Poor's, you'd be there for on average about 33 years. Now we're seeing that change and shrink to about 18 years. So the opportunity is changing, but the brands that are at the top, they've got a lot of work to do to stay there. I'll give you an example of this. We're seeing a lot of brands now come up from behind that became multi-billion-dollar businesses in just a handful of years. One example of this is Huda Beauty. That's what you're looking at behind me. This is a $1 billion Instagram business that came to be after just 4 years. This is a brand that came up as a challenger that now can actually take on what we've seen at the very, very top. And we believe that this is happening because of this staggering change and because of the opportunity that the world now presents us, which I'll take you through shortly. Of course, this isn't just applying to business. It's also happening with charity and with social causes. On Giving Tuesday, which follows Black Friday in the United States, we saw 1 million people donating over $125 million to 100,000 global causes around the world. So, what do we take away from that? Well, it's that good ideas aren't just serving people. Arguably, they are shaped by people. And you know, at Facebook, we're not immune to this. We've had to change too. People have fundamentally started to demand the products that now define us as a company. I've only been at the company for about 5 years, but if you go back about 8 years, you'll discover that we had to completely rewrite our product from the ground up. We started as a desktop application, and as soon as mobile came out, we had to make significant changes in order to get us to where we are today. And if we hadn't done that, our business would have failed. And we're doing that now, as we watch people transition from using words to express themselves, to images, to video, and now, as you were just hearing too, to stories. So, as we look at all these changes, we have to ask ourselves, what separates the good ideas that work from the ones that are forgotten? I'd like to introduce 4 ideas. There's 4 simple things that we now look at as we consider how we're going to evolve our own products, and that we would humbly recommend that you consider as you think about your marketing. The first is curation. We now live in a world where people have infinite control over the content that they consume and infinite control over where they consume it. So in that space, how do you change to meet them there? The second is community. People now come together around all manner of topics. So where do brands fit into that conversation? Third is conversation. We now live in a world where people have an expectation of direct communication and immediate response. So how do you meet them in the middle? And fourth is commerce. Now that we've seen all of these forces change, how do we come together in a place where price transparency and immediate access is the norm to help meet and serve a client? So, let's start by diving directly into curation. We know that people have infinite choice, so how do we ensure that they choose you as a product? So one thing to consider as we think about how curation has changed in this world is this. If we go back in time to when I was growing up, cable was the norm. But if we look now, by 2021, according to Wired, there will be more people in the world who have never had cable or a cable in their home as those who have. So we're starting to see the influence that people are bringing to the world around them through stats like this. So how do we approach this? Well, arguably, if we know that people are putting this much pressure into the world around them and exerting their point of view in this way, we must build for discovery. And how do we do that? This may seem obvious, but fundamentally, meet them where they are. Show up where they are on their platforms, not where they were in the past. And I'll give you an example of how this has changed. When we look at video consumption habits just on our own platform, we've seen a 14-time increase in the amount of video consumption on Facebook just in 2018 alone. So the move is not just happening from cable to digital, it's happening from cable to social media. And perhaps more interestingly, over 1 billion people are now sharing stories across Facebook, Instagram, and Messenger every day. And if this continues at the pace that it's at now, soon stories will eclipse newsfeed as the way that people prefer to share socially. So, what should we do with that? First, let's try and capture someone's attention and then fundamentally reward that interest in the way that we plan our campaigns. So how do we do that? Well, we have 3 stages to it. The first is this idea around pitch, using feed, using stories, using in-stream media to first convey the idea that you want to the audience and bring them into your story. The second is what we would call play content, or lean back. After you've captured their attention, talk to them through Stories Carousel. Use an instant experience to connect to them. And then finally, use what I would consider a plunge experience or an emerging technology. Connect directly with messaging, which we'll talk more about in a moment. Utilize new media like Instagram TV, or even create something experiential like augmented reality. So, in this curated world, pitch, play, and then plunge. And there's a reason why this works. When we look at all of these multi-asset campaigns across all of our different platforms, we continue to see them overperform. From ad recall to awareness to association, affinity, and familiarity, we see a growth across multi-asset campaigns that demonstrate the value of this. Now, community. How do we discover the things that matter and let the world know why your brand can matter to them? You may have noticed this if you use our platforms, but there is a community for everything. So if you're into small dogs, if you want to build guitars, if you have a political cause that matters to you, or if you just want to hang out with new parents, which is something that I do on Facebook all the time, there is a community for you. And the numbers prove it. When we look across all of Facebook, we consistently see growth there. Right now, there's 200 million people who participate in an active group on Facebook every single month, and that number continues to increase day over day. And these people have done everything from launching a social cause, like Body Positive, to driving memes. We see the social action happening on our platform every single day. So, how do you leverage these communities to build and to serve them for your brand? We would argue that brands have the opportunity to identify and astound folks using community. So let me give you a handful of examples of this. The first is from Johnson & Johnson, and this is what we would consider inspiration. This was a campaign that focused on bringing older members of the community together to speak to younger women and get them confident about the changes that they were seeing in their body as youth and encouraging them to embrace themselves through the products. Second is Nike. This is around celebration. This campaign specifically was about nothing beats a Londoner. That's probably an argument that we can have here. But the idea here was that there's a unique spirit tied to people who are passionate about sports in London. And if we can capture that and celebrate that through the media, we can reach community. This is one of my favorites. This is about community empowerment. This is from Cape Town, and it was a local community organization called SSA. And the goal here specifically was to get people to address a water shortage by encouraging them to only take 2-minute showers, and to do so by providing them 2-minute music videos to sing along to in the shower. And then finally, the fourth, Purple, which is a direct-to-consumer mattress brand in the United States, created what they called the Purple Boys. And the Purple Boys would help you address what they also called the Sunday Scaries, which is that awkward feeling you have when you start to feel what you have to do at work on Monday. And they created tips to help people have a better night's sleep on their mattresses by addressing and embracing the Sunday Scaries. So if you take those 4 examples and you think about how you can inspire and entertain and through, and you take that into a place where you can tell your story mobile first, and you do this across different platforms, different content styles, and embrace the diversity that we talked about in curation, we believe and have seen brands succeed. So let's talk a little bit about messaging and conversation. Arguably, we're in a new age right now where all business now can feel like small business. One thing that is true about messaging and has always been, regardless of whether we're talking about our products or other competitive products, is that messaging is fundamentally about expression and immediacy. And this is something that we have seen as we look all around the world, that people now communicate this way with one another, so it stands to reason that they want to communicate this way with people, with businesses too. And we've seen this in the growth of the numbers. When I started working on Messenger about 3 years ago, we had 700 million users every single month. That has doubled now to 1.4 billion. If you put that into comparison, with WhatsApp, that's 1.5 billion. So that means that 1 out of every 5 people on the planet is currently using these applications all the time. And they're doing so expressively. One of my favorite bits of data is that imagery is now the primary way that people like to communicate. More than half of people that we've asked said that they regularly have conversations that just consist of emojis. This is, by the way, side note, this is completely true for my mother. Now, when we think about this more broadly, about how this applies specifically to a business, people now have an expectation that you, as businesses, will behave and connect and express yourself in the same way that they do. And that's why 53% of people who message a business are more likely to do business with those folks. And we've seen a growth in the scale of that messaging too, as more businesses have become more equipped to connect. This is why we've seen a growth from 2 billion to 10 billion messages sent every single month on Messenger just in the last 2 years alone. So, how do you meet people where they are on messaging? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. We would suggest, unsurprisingly, that you focus on direct personalization and don't focus necessarily on building a persona, but just help meet the individual and shorten the distance between their objective and how to get there. Now, what's fascinating about this is that we've seen lots of different brands succeed in this space. That's everything from multinational brands like the #1 toy brand in the world, Lego, all the way to social causes that benefit from having a direct and personal connection, like, say, Alcoholics Anonymous. So regardless of what the brand is or what the cause is, people have an extreme desire to connect, and those who can succeed in that space. Finally, let's talk a little bit about commerce. Now, in a connected world, we can argue that the edge can go to those who can appeal the fastest and the deepest with the most personalization. One thing that we've learned as we look at across multiple different verticals in multiple different countries is that people tend to browse significantly fewer products on mobile versus desktop. In fact, when we look at apparel in general globally, what we find is that most people spend less than 5 minutes from the moment that they discover a product to when they actually make the purchase. Now, that's a huge opportunity, but it also creates a lot of challenge. If we look in the United States, for example, 83% of people who have a bad experience online will abandon their shopping cart. 83%. And if you translate that into actual revenue, that's $213 billion of lost revenue tied to bad customer experience. And that's just in the US. Now, when we look at this more broadly, we start to realize that there are opportunities around new surfaces, and that these new surfaces tend to serve customers that have the opportunity to embrace these, that tend to serve businesses that have the opportunity to embrace customers on this level. One of those is Marketplace. Marketplace is a new platform on Facebook, which we've launched just a few years ago, and what we discovered in that space is that 800 million people now come together to buy and sell from one another just because we have made it frictionless for them to do so. So, how do you take advantage of using these platforms to address the friction of the abandoned shopping cart? Well, the first thing that we would do is to recommend that you break through. And to do so without leaving Facebook or Instagram, there are two products you can leverage. You can use collections or instant experiences that allow individuals to select the products that they want to buy from you and make that conversion directly in Facebook or Instagram without having to leave. And if you can help these products directly find the people that they serve, then arguably you can succeed in helping to diminish those lost carts and diminish that friction. And of course, if you can leverage these tools and measure against that space, then you can embrace the test and learn mentality that we have seen arguably supporting individuals and brands as they move into this new space. So, as we think about those 4 C's, and as we think about the opportunities that come together, arguably, despite the challenges that we've seen and despite some of the things that we have seen just across the competitive set in general and the realities of the digital world, today, we truly do believe that if you can embrace those 4 C's, that you can build together and prove us that there has never been a better time to have a good idea. Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much, Asher. So last year we had some technical issues, and the first speaker didn't come, and because he was talking through a robot, the Wi-Fi fell, etc. So it was very chaotic, and I had to improvise. And I thought everything was going too well this year, and that's why I called you when you were actually speaking next. And so my apologies for throwing you on stage like that. I even managed to make it look like it was not my fault. Right, which is very French, and I'm very proud of that, but it was my fault, so apologies for sending you. Thank you so much for having an agile mindset. I have one question for you. We just mentioned, it was in French, but the previous talk we talked about retail, and one of the points the speaker was making is how digital and physical are coming together. What is the strategy of a company like Facebook when it comes to physical spaces? Because we know what you do in the digital world. Do you intend to come into the physical world one of these days?
So 2 things. First of all, no problem on the technical side. I actually did not go to school for marketing. I went to school for theater. So if anyone ever says that a theater degree doesn't give you anything, it's a lie. Now, to answer your question, relative to the way that we think about our current technology and the future, there's actually 3 worlds that we think about building for. There's the physical world, which is arguably what all of our products are around now. There's the augmented world, which is what we are building for with stories and augmented reality in the future. And then not too far from now, there will also be the virtual world, where basically everything is completely different from how we consider today. So there's 2 ways to look at this if we consider those 3 worlds. The first is, how do we drive in-store when it comes to the physical world? And I think there's technology solutions there, although we played with them for a while, and they're a little clunky around beacons and measurement of footfall and things like that. But honestly, I think where we're going to go in terms of driving in-store and driving physical engagement is tied more towards augmentation, where we'll start seeing the tools that Facebook builds move out into the world around us, where the data that used to exist just in your feed can exist dispersed through things like head-worn gear, for example, or in-store through augmented mirrors and displays, and eventually through personalization that will be driven by Facebook. We'll see a link between the physical world and the augmented because of the way behaviors are shifting.
Definitely some merging going on, and I wonder how long we will have to differentiate between online and offline. I'm not sure it's going to be for long. Thank you very much. Warm round of applause for our speaker, Asher Rapkin. Thank you very much.